Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back into a world where the clang of metal could echo through your dreams, where the smell of damp earth mixed with the tang of iron, and where the line between boy and man blurred the moment you could hold a spear steady. Imagine standing in a muddy field at dawn, the mist curling low over the grass, and every breath you take feels heavy with the weight of what's coming. You've been handed a weapon longer than you are tall, and someone's telling you you'll be marching out before breakfast. You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. I love picturing this sleepy little community scattered all over the world, each of us drifting toward the same dream at different hours of the night. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's easy from the safety of a modern bedroom to imagine that in the Middle Ages, you had to be some hulking, grizzled warrior to join a battle. But history, with all its inconvenient truths, shows us something far less comforting. In many parts of medieval Europe, the age at which you might be called or pushed into fighting was shockingly low. This wasn't a time when armies held polite recruitment drives with age limits posted in neat handwriting. It was a time when survival often came down to whether you could carry a weapon, keep up with the column, and stand your ground when another human charged at you with the intent to kill. Picture a boy of 12 or 13. In our world, he's still learning algebra, probably doesn't know how to boil pasta, and is more concerned with whether he'll make the school football team. In medieval England, France, or the Holy Roman Empire, that same age might be enough for him to be apprenticed to a knight as a page. He wouldn't be in the thick of battle just yet, not officially, but he'd be training, absorbing the culture of war, like the smell of the stables and the scrape of whetstones on sword edges. By 14, if he'd shown promise, he could be a squire riding alongside his knight into dangerous territory, carrying weapons, tending armor, and learning firsthand what it meant to serve in war. The line between training and combat wasn't a brick wall. It was more like a slippery slope. You could be helping your knight in the middle of a skirmish one day and find yourself swinging a sword at an enemy the next. The chronicles tell us stories of squires who, in moments of crisis, fought as fiercely as seasoned men-at-arms. In other words, the battlefield didn't always wait politely for your 18th birthday. And that was just the noble side of the equation. For common folk, the rules, such as they were, could be even looser. Many medieval towns were obliged to supply a certain number of able-bodied men for the local lord's service. In desperate times, able-bodied could mean anyone who could stand upright and grip a spear. Archaeological evidence combined with accounts from the period shows that some militia fighters were barely into their mid-teens. A shortage of manpower didn't inspire moral debates. It inspired practical solutions. And one very practical solution was to hand the nearest teenager a pike and point him toward the enemy. Now you might be wondering, how could a young boy possibly survive the brutal physical demands of war? The sad answer is often they didn't. But those who did had usually been conditioned for physical hardship from a young age. Farming life meant long days of manual labor starting in childhood. Hauling water, chopping wood, herding animals. These weren't weekend chores. They were everyday survival tasks. By the time a medieval boy was 12, his body could be wiry, strong, and accustomed to carrying heavy loads. It wasn't the gym that trained him, it was the simple, relentless grind of rural life. And let's not forget the emotional conditioning. In an age where death was common, the idea of risking your life, whether in battle in the fields or from disease, wasn't so alien. The modern concept of adolescence as a protected bubble between childhood and adulthood simply didn't exist. You might be considered a child in one breath and an adult in the next, depending on what the day demanded of you. Still, there was a certain grim logic to starting young. If you wanted someone to become a skilled fighter, you didn't wait until he was a grown man to teach him how to handle weapons. Training began with wooden swords, archery practice, riding drills. A boy who started these at 10 could be competent by his early teens, ready in the eyes of his lord or community to fight if needed. It's unsettling to think of a 13-year-old as ready for battle, but that's exactly how the system worked. And there were exceptions that tilted the balance even further. During times of prolonged war, think the 100 Years' War between England and France, the need for troops could become so acute that the age bar quietly slid downward. Chronicles mention boys barely into double digits acting as messengers, scouts, and yes, sometimes even fighters. In siege warfare, when defenders were desperate, everyone might be called to the walls, including women, the elderly, and teenagers. The alternative wasn't peace, it was slaughter. The church had its opinions, of course, and sometimes tried to impose moral restraint. There were papal decrees urging Christian rulers not to send children into battle, but these edicts often melted away when confronted with the cold reality of military necessity. Lords and commanders might nod in polite agreement to churchmen, then return home and tell their captains to take whoever could hold a spear straight. Even in knightly culture, with its lofty ideals of chivalry, the romanticized image of the gallant warrior often masked the reality that boys were groomed for combat well before they reached what we'd call adulthood. The chivalric code might have preached honor and mercy, but it also glorified martial skill, loyalty to one's lord, and the readiness to fight for those causes without hesitation. If anything, it reinforced the idea that a young nobleman should prove himself early. Now imagine yourself in that world lying in the dark the night before your first muster. You're on a straw pallet in the corner of a drafty hall, surrounded by the creak of timbers and the murmurs of others trying to sleep. Your hands smell faintly of oil from cleaning weapons, and your mind is replaying the drills you've done 100 times. You've heard stories of battle from older men, some proud, some bitter, some haunted. You wonder which one you'll become if you make it home at all. Sleep doesn't come easy. You're young, yes, but in the morning you'll be a soldier. And so, in the medieval world, the answer to the question, how old did you have to be to fight, was as fluid as the muddy fields you might march across. Sometimes the answer was written in law or custom. More often it was written in desperation, necessity, and the cold arithmetic of war. And for many, that meant stepping into the role of a fighter years before their bodies or hearts were truly ready. The morning comes faster than you thought it would. Someone shakes your shoulder, the gray light of dawn seeping through the cracks in the shutters. The hall smells of damp wool wood smoke and the faint tang of last night's stew. Around you, other boys and men are already stirring, pulling on padded gambesons, fastening belts, checking straps on scabbards. There's no slow waking here, only the brisk, unavoidable knowledge that today you're expected to be ready. In medieval times, the muster was both a ritual and a test. Lords would call their men together in a field or within the bailey of a castle, checking who had turned up, who had the right gear, and who perhaps was trying to slip away unnoticed. Attendance wasn't optional. Feudal obligation bound you to serve when summoned. For younger fighters, this was a moment of both dread and pride. To stand there, weapon in hand, was proof you were counted among the able-bodied. Whether you truly were was another matter entirely. Weapons for a young recruit might be handed down from older relatives or scavenged from the Lord's armory. They were rarely new. A pike with a splintered haft, a dented helmet, a patched-up hauberk, these were common. Armor was expensive, and full suits of plate were the preserve of wealthy knights. If you were lucky, you had a decent mail shirt and a padded arming coat beneath it. If you were less lucky, you wore only thick wool and hoped it would turn a blade, at least for a moment. The weight of even partial armor was something to get used to. Imagine carrying an anvil on your shoulders while trying to keep up with a column of marching men. Training in the weeks or months before a campaign could be minimal for those not raised in the knightly class. A few days of drilling with spears, practicing the formation known as a hedge against cavalry, maybe some archery if you had a bow. But experience was considered the real teacher, and that meant you learned on the job, sometimes with deadly consequences. One mistake in formation could open a gap for the enemy to exploit, and one slip of the foot could bring you face to face with a mounted knight whose lance was already leveled at your chest. For noble boys, the start of a campaign might be less about proving physical endurance and more about demonstrating loyalty and courage. A squire was expected to keep close to his night watch and learn and be ready to step in if his master was unhorsed or otherwise endangered. There are accounts from the 100 Years' War of squires rescuing their knights in the thick of battle, fending off attackers with sword or dagger until help arrived. The expectation was that you would not run. Even if your heart hammered in your chest like a drum, even if you wanted to throw down your weapon and flee, you stayed. Cowardice could stain your name for life, and in a society where honor was currency, that was a sentence worse than death for some. The age question becomes murkier when you look beyond Western Europe. In parts of the Byzantine Empire, boys could be drafted into military service in their mid-teens, especially during prolonged conflicts. In the Islamic world, similar expectations could be placed on youths, though often tempered by the idea that they should at least be capable of wielding their weapons effectively before being sent into danger. Mongol armies, too, trained their boys early archery and horsemanship, were skills taught from the time they could walk, so by the age of 12, many could already outshoot and outride grown men from sedentary cultures. But let's stay in our muddy European field for a moment. You're lined up now, the Lord Steward pacing along the row, his eyes sharp for any sign of weakness or unpreparedness. He might prod the haft of your spear, check the edge of your blade, or yank on your helmet to see if it's secure. Then comes the count, the tally of who will march. When your name or the name of your village is called, you step forward. That step is more than just movement. It's a crossing into a new reality. For some boys, that step was taken as early as 12. For others, 15 or 16. But rarely did anyone escape the call for long, especially in a war-torn region. If your father or elder brothers were dead missing or too old, you might find yourself representing your household earlier than you ever imagined. The feudal system didn't much care whether you felt ready. Service was a duty, not a choice. The march itself was another trial. Medieval campaigns rarely moved at lightning speed, but the terrain, the weather, and the weight of your gear turned every mile into a test of endurance. Mud sucked at your boots, rain soaked through your cloak, and the wind sliced into you like a knife. If you were lucky enough to ride, the days were easier on your feet, but the constant jolting could leave your body aching in ways you hadn't thought possible. Nights were spent in makeshift camps, sometimes huddled under nothing more than a blanket, with the ground for a bed, and the stars for a roof. Around the campfires, the older soldiers might swap stories, some meant to inspire, others to frighten. Tales of sieges where food ran out and men boiled leather to make broth. Tales of charges that shattered enemy lines in minutes, and others where the charging force was annihilated before they even reached the foe. You'd listen wide-eyed, trying to read between the lines for hints on how to survive. The veterans often looked at the youngest recruits with a mixture of pity and resignation. They knew what was coming, even if you didn't. It's important to understand that while age played a role in determining who fought, the realities of medieval society meant those lines were always blurred by necessity. Warfare was not a neatly scheduled affair. It came when it came, often without warning, and it demanded bodies to fill the ranks. A lord who hesitated to field younger fighters risked losing not only battles, but his lands, his wealth, and his life. So if you picture yourself there in that camp, maybe 15 years old, your breath fogging in the chill night air, you'd feel the weight of more than just your armor. You'd feel the weight of expectation from your family, your lord, and the unspoken code of survival that governed medieval life. You might still feel like a boy inside, but the world had already decided you were a man, and that perhaps is the truest answer to the question of how old you had to be to fight in medieval times. You had to be old enough for someone with power over you to believe you could fight. That could mean 18, it could mean 14. Sometimes it could mean even younger, and whether you survived long enough to grow into the role was another matter entirely. The flicker of firelight on faces, the low murmur of men talking, the smell of roasting meat mixed with wet wool, these sensations blend together as the night deepens. Somewhere nearby, a sentry coughs, and another calls out a challenge to a shadow moving near the camp. You pull your cloak tighter, the spear at your side, a strange comfort. Tomorrow you march again, and the day after that. And eventually, perhaps sooner than you'd like, the day will come when the march ends in battle. Dawn comes with no warning, just the slow fading of the stars and the pale smear of light across the eastern sky. The camp is already in motion by the time you blink awake. Horses snort and stamp in the chill air, harnesses jingling as squires tighten straps and check buckles. Fires have burned down to embers, and the scent of smoke lingers low to the ground. You chew a piece of coarse bread, the crust so hard it scrapes your gums, and wash it down with a swallow of tepid water from a leather flask. There's no leisurely breakfast here. The road and the day's work are waiting. Word has come the enemy is near, close enough that scouts have glimpsed their banners in the distance, snapping in the wind. The column moves out with purpose now. No stragglers, no idle chatter, just the steady rhythm of boots and hooves, the clink and rattle of weapons and armor. You've been told that your place as one of the younger fighters will be toward the rear of the formation. This is supposed to be safer shielded by the experienced men ahead of you. But anyone who's heard enough stories knows there's no such thing as a truly safe place in battle. Arrows don't care where you stand. Cavalry can wheel around and strike from behind. And if the line breaks, well, the rear can become the front in an instant. The first hint of the enemy is a sound low at first, like distant thunder. It's the murmur of hundreds of voices, the clink of their gear, the thud of their boots. Then faintly, the metallic ring of weapons striking together, either in practice or in the nervous habit soldiers have before a fight. Your stomach knots, and you grip your spear tighter, feeling the rough wood against your palm. When both forces come into view, It's like two tides rolling toward each other, still separate for now, but destined to clash. The air is tense, heavy, and every sound feels sharper. The creak of leather, the hiss of a bowstring being drawn, the faint whicker of a horse shaking its mane. Somewhere ahead, the standard-bearers plant their poles firmly in the earth, banners snapping above them, a rallying point if things go wrong. Then comes the waiting. This is something they don't tell you about in all the tales of glory. Battles don't always start with a sudden charge. Sometimes they begin with a long, cold stretch of standing in place, heart pounding, every muscle wound tight. You watch the enemy, they watch you, and somewhere between the lines, a few unlucky souls, messengers, perhaps trot nervously across the open ground. The first arrows arc overhead. You hear them before you see them, a rushing hiss, like a gust of wind ending in dull thuds or sickening cracks. Someone near you cries out and crumples. The line shifts uneasily, shields coming up, heads ducking. For you, it's the moment when this stops being a drill. The arrows aren't for practice. The shouts aren't from sparring. This is real. Orders ripple down the line. The front ranks brace shields, interlocking spears angled forward. You feel the push from behind as everyone tries to close gaps. The ground underfoot is uneven, and you keep adjusting your stance, terrified of tripping. The enemy begins to advance their formation tight, their weapons gleaming dully in the morning light. You can see their faces now, some young, some weathered, all set in grim determination. The first clash is a noise like nothing else, the crash of wood and steel, the grunt and cry of men straining against each other. You surge forward with the press of bodies, the spear in your hands, finding the gap between two shields almost by accident. You jab, feel resistance, hear a muffled cry, and yank the spear back and your breath ragged. Around you, the press of men is so tight you can barely move your arms, but you keep pushing, shoving, thrusting when you see an opening. It's chaos. You hear the roar of a man somewhere to your left, the sharp clang of sword on helmet to your right. The air smells of sweat iron and something sharper blood. The ground is already slick in places, and you plant your feet carefully, knowing a slip could mean death. Someone shouts for the line to hold. You don't even know who it is, but you cling to the words like a lifeline. Then suddenly, the line buckles. You're shoved sideways, nearly losing your footing, as enemy soldiers push through a gap. A knight in gleaming armor barrels into view, his sword rising and falling with terrible speed. The men ahead of you scatter or fall, and before you can think, you're face to face with an enemy twice your size. He swings low, the blade flashing toward your legs, and you stumble back, jabbing wildly with your spear. It glances off his armor, buying you just enough time for someone else to drive a pike into his zone. He crumples, and you stand frozen, chest heaving, unsure whether you've just survived or barely delayed the inevitable. In moments like this, your age doesn't matter. No one is looking at you and thinking too young. They're looking at you to hold the line, to fight to survive. You could be 13, you could be 30. It's all the same in the madness of the melee. Somewhere behind the horn sounds a long, low note that means fall back. You're not sure why. Maybe the flank is collapsing. Maybe reinforcements are coming. Either way, you turn and run with the others, boots slipping in the churned mud, the noise of pursuit pounding at your heels. This is another truth that they don't tell you sometimes. The bravest thing you can do is run. You reach the rallying point, gasping, clutching your spear. Men are already reforming the line, shouting to one another, dragging the wounded out of the way. You glance at your hands and realize they're shaking your knuckles white against the wood. You can still hear the roar of battle behind you, but for now, you're alive. This was just the first taste. Some boys didn't even get that much before falling. Others found themselves fighting again within minutes, the enemy pressing hard. And for all of them, young or old, the question of how old did you have to be became irrelevant the moment the fighting started. You were old enough if you were here. You were old enough if you could stand your ground. You were old enough if you could make it to the next hour alive. As the day drags on, the rhythm of battle ebbs and flows. Charges surge forward, falter, and are driven back. Arrows rain down in sudden flurries. The sun climbs high, the heat baking through your armor, your mouth dry no matter how much you drink. You stop noticing the aches in your muscles. They're simply part of you now. You stop noticing the fear, too, because fear has no place left to grow when you're already drenched in it. By evening, when the fighting finally slows, the field is a place of strange quiet. Crows wheel overhead. Men pick through the wreckage searching for friends or scavenging weapons. You find yourself sitting on a fallen log, your spear leaning against your shoulder, the world spinning slightly around you. The veterans don't say much. They've seen too many first battles to think words will help. That night, you lie awake under the stars, the shouts and clangs replaying in your head. You wonder if you fought well, if you disgraced yourself, if you'll be called forward again tomorrow. You wonder if this is what it will be like for the rest of the campaign. And you realize something. Whatever age you started, if you keep fighting, you won't be the same person by the time you stop. The next morning, the air is sharp and cold, carrying the faint, sweet, sour smell of trampled grass, churned mud and blood that hasn't yet washed away. Your body feels as though it belongs to someone else, your arms heavy, your legs stiff, every bruise and scrape sending up a dull complaint each time you move. You've discovered muscles you didn't know you had, and all of them seem to be protesting. Sleep was a fractured thing, scattered between bursts of memory, the scream of a man falling, the glint of an enemy's blade, the thud of your spear finding its mark. Around you, the camp is quieter than usual. Men move with deliberate slowness, speaking in low tones. The clatter of armor is muted, the usual morning banter gone. A few men tend to their gear, oiling blades, patching gambesons. Others sit silently staring into the middle distance, their eyes shadowed. The wounded are the busiest, those who can still walk, shuffle toward the makeshift healer's tent, where the smell of crushed herbs fights with the copper tang of blood. Those who can't walk are carried. You're told to report to your company's sergeant. He's an older man, his face weathered into deep lines, his voice gravelly from years of shouting over the din of battle. He looks you over with a quick, practiced glance, not to admire or chastise, just to take stock. Still alive, still breathing, still able to carry a spear. That's enough for now. There's no ceremony for surviving your first fight. No one claps you on the back or says, "Well done, lad." The medieval army wasn't built for sentiment. You simply keep moving forward as if yesterday were just another task on a long list. The work of war doesn't pause for reflection. There are dead to be buried or burned wounded to tend supplies to recover from the field before scavengers, human or otherwise, pick it clean. For the younger fighters, the aftermath could be just as dangerous as the battle itself. If you were wounded, the lack of modern medicine meant even small injuries could fester. A cut from a blade might look clean, but could turn septic in days. Fever was as much an enemy as any man with a sword. And if you were fortunate enough to escape injury, you might still face the creeping exhaustion that came from poor food, cold nights, and the constant tension of expecting another attack. If you were a squire, your duties in the aftermath were doubled. Not only did you have to keep yourself in one piece, but you also had to see to your knight's needs. His armor would need cleaning and repair, his horse feeding and tending. His wounds, if he had any, would be your responsibility until a surgeon could take over. And while you might long for sleep, your knight's demands took priority. Serving in this role was part apprenticeship, part test of endurance. Among the common soldiers, the rhythm was much the same. After a fight, your lord or captain might order the company to fortify the camp, dig ditches, or erect palisades. If the army was preparing for a siege, you might be set to hauling timber building siege engines or digging tunnels toward enemy walls. Rest was a luxury granted in scraps rather than full nights. And still, you were expected to be ready if the enemy attacked again. There were campaigns where battles came in quick succession, the space between them measured in days rather than weeks. A young fighter might have little time to process what had happened before he was thrust back into the fray. The shock of that first fight didn't have a chance to fade, it was simply buried under the next one. In some cases, the aftermath wasn't even spent near the battlefield. If the enemy retreated, the army might follow, pressing the advantage. That meant long, punishing marches with the same weight of gear, the same hard ground to sleep on. For the youngest soldiers, this was the crucible in which they were forged or broken. Some adapted quickly, their bodies hardening their minds, learning to function under constant stress. Others withered their spirits, worn thin until illness, injury, or desertion took them out of the ranks. But here's the thing, even if you were young, even if you had barely crossed the threshold into your teens, you were still part of the machine. There was no allowance for youth once you'd stepped into the role of a soldier. You'd taken your place in the line and now you were expected to hold it. The fact that you might still be growing, that you might have been chasing rabbits in the fields just months ago, mattered to no one but yourself. It's in these quieter moments, if they can be called quiet, that you begin to notice the subtle changes in yourself. You start checking your gear automatically without being told. You listen for certain sounds in the night and can tell the difference between the wind in the trees and the footsteps of a man approaching. You begin to eat faster because you've learned that the call to move can come before you've finished. These habits creep in until they're simply part of who you are. And yet for all that, the innocence of your age lingers in strange ways. You still find yourself drawn to the campfires at night, listening to the older soldiers' stories, half in awe, half in disbelief. You still laugh at jokes that have nothing to do with war, though the laughter comes less often now. And when it does, it feels sharper, more fleeting. In those moments, you're reminded that you're still a boy in a man's world. But that realization fades each time the horn blows or the captain calls. The men who've fought for years know this transformation well. They've seen it happen to countless young recruits, the slow erosion of softness, the sharpening of edges, the way a face can age in months instead of years. Some veterans take a quiet pride in seeing a boy become a soldier. Others look away, perhaps remembering their own youth and the price they paid for it. In the larger view of history, these moments after battle rarely make it into the chronicles. The scribes wrote of victories, defeats, treaties, and noble deeds. They didn't write about the 15-year-old who sat by the fire staring at his boots because he couldn't shake the sound of them while dying in his arms. They didn't write about the 13-year-old squire scrubbing blood out of a surcoat by moonlight. But those moments were as much a part of war as any charge or siege. And so the answer to how old did you have to be isn't just about the age you first picked up a weapon. It's about the age you stopped being able to put it down. Once you'd fought, whether you were 12 or 20, there was no going back to the boy you'd been. The world wouldn't let you. The army wouldn't let you. And perhaps you wouldn't let yourself. By the second or third day after that first clash, the wounds in the ranks are tallied replacements sought, if any can be found. The commanders make their plans. Scouts range ahead, bringing back news of the enemy's movements. The soldiers, young and old, fall back into the same routine as before, because that's how armies survive, by doing the same things over and over until they're muscle memory. And when the next call comes, when the next march begins, you pick up your spear, adjust your cloak, and take your place in the line. Whatever aches you carry, whatever memories you wish you could bury, they go with you. Because in medieval times, once you were counted among the fighters, you fought until you could fight no more. The days begin to blend into one another. You lose track of how long it's been since that first battle. Weeks, a month more. Time on campaign isn't measured in neat little boxes on a calendar. It's measured in marches, in skirmishes, in the number of times you've replaced a snapped spearhead or patched a tear in your cloak. Your body changes first. At home, you thought you were strong from farm work or training, but this is different. The constant weight of your armor, however little or much you have, shapes. Your shoulders toughens your back. Your palms grow hard with calluses from gripping spear shafts, sword hilts, and shield straps day after day. The blisters on your feet harden into leathery pads, though they still ache when you bed down at night. You walk farther in a week than you once did in a month, your legs learning to keep moving long after your mind wants to stop. Hunger becomes a companion you simply live with. Food on campaign is rarely enough and rarely fresh. Salted meat, coarse bread, the occasional pot of stew when supplies allow. It's fuel, nothing more. You learn to eat quickly and without complaint, because there may not be seconds, and there's no telling when the next meal will come. The older men joke that campaign life is the best diet a man can have. You'll come home leaner, harder, they say, if you come home at all. You force a smile when they say it, but inside you know there's truth there. The road has a way of stripping you down to the essentials, of leaving only what's necessary to survive. The mind takes longer to adapt. The first few nights you woke with every strange sound, your heart hammering. A snapping twig, a cough in the darkness, the sudden whinny of a horse, each one felt like the start of another attack. Over time, you learn to tell the difference between danger and background noise, though part of you stays wound tight even in sleep. Dreams come and go, sometimes vivid, sometimes absent. The bad ones where you're back in the press of battle or standing frozen as an enemy charges cling to you in the morning like a second skin. If you're lucky, you find a few older soldiers willing to pass along their wisdom. Not the grand speeches of captains, but the quiet advice that keeps you alive. Keep your gear dry. Never drink all your water before midday. Don't chase a fleeing enemy too far. It's how they lead you into traps. Never look too long into the eyes of the man you've just killed. They may be too much like your own. Marches are punctuated by moments of both camaraderie and silence. On good days, the column moves smoothly, the weather holds, and someone starts a song that threads its way through the ranks. On bad days, the rain turns the road to soup boots suck at the mud, and conversation dies into grim muttering. You keep your head down, focusing on the rhythm of your steps. Left, right. Left, right. Don't stumble. Every so often, you're called into smaller engagements, raids on enemy supply lines, skirmishes over a bridge or a hilltop. These are shorter, sharper bursts of violence than the great set-piece battles, but no less dangerous. A lucky arrow, a well-aimed sling stone, a sudden rush by hidden cavalry, any of these can cut down the unwary. And in these moments you realize that your age doesn't shield you from danger. In fact, sometimes being younger makes you a target, because an enemy might see you as an easier kill. It's in the long stretches between fights that the true grind of campaign life sets in. The monotony wears at you even as the tension simmers underneath. You never truly relax. Even when the sun is shining and the road ahead seems quiet, you know that danger can appear without warning. You hear the stories: a supply train ambushed by bandits, a scouting party vanishing without trace, a village burned in the night. These tales keep your senses sharp, but they also carve away the last bits of carefree youth you might have had left. And yet amidst the hardship, strange bonds form. The men you march beside become something like family, not because you share blood, but because you share the road, the cold, the hunger, and the fear. They see you at your weakest and your strongest, and you see them in the same light. You learn who will share their last scrap of bread, who will steady you when you stumble, who will stand in front of you when the arrows start to fall. The veterans have a saying: you come to war with strangers, and you leave it with brothers. You don't yet know if you'll live long enough to leave it, but you understand the meaning now. It's in the way a man you barely knew a month ago will risk himself to drag you out of harm's way. It's in the way you find yourself doing the same without hesitation. Your youth, though, still sets you apart in certain ways. You recover from marches faster than some of the older men. You can run when you have to climb a wall or scramble through rough ground without your joints complaining. But you also tire more quickly in the press of battle, your endurance not yet that of a seasoned warrior. And while you may heal faster from cuts and bruises, the mental scars, those quiet moments, when you remember faces, voices, screams, don't fade so easily. Letters from home, if they reach you at all, are both a blessing and a curse. They remind you of fields in summer, of hearth smoke and fresh bread, of the laughter of siblings or friends. But they also make the gap between your old life and your new one feel impossibly wide. Sometimes you fold the letter away unread, telling yourself you'll look at it later when you have the strength. Sometimes you read it until the ink smudges because you need the tether it offers. Weeks turn into months. The campaign moves in fits and starts, periods of waiting, sudden bursts of action, the long pull toward whatever goal the commanders have set. You hear rumors of peace, of truces being discussed, but you don't believe them until you see the banners lowered yourself. Too often, talk of peace is just that talk, and so your body hardens further. Your mind learns to endure. You're no longer the wide-eyed boy who took up a spear because someone told you to. You're something else now, not yet a veteran, but no longer a novice. You've crossed a threshold that can't be uncrossed, and you know it. At night, lying beneath your cloak with the stars overhead, you sometimes think about the question that brought you here: how old did you have to be to fight? You realize now that it wasn't about birthdays or numbers. It was about readiness, necessity, and the will of others. And once you'd been chosen or pressed into service, the years stopped mattering. The campaign made you older in ways that no count of winters could measure. Tomorrow you'll march again. You'll shoulder your gear, tighten the strap on your helmet, and take your place in the line. Somewhere ahead, there will be another fight. You don't know when and you don't know where, but you'll be there because that's what soldiers, young or old, do. The march finally slows, but not because the campaign is over. Instead, the army halts before the looming walls of a fortified town, stone towers, rising like teeth against the horizon, banners snapping defiantly in the wind. You've arrived at the next trial, a siege. From a distance, it almost looks peaceful. The walls are clean and pale in the morning sun. Birds circle lazily overhead, and the fields around them lie still. But the moment you get closer, the mood changes. The defenders are already visible along the battlements, small silhouettes against the sky, watching your every move. Their crossbows and bows are ready, their cauldrons and heavy stones waiting. You realize with a chill that they've known you were coming for days, maybe weeks. A siege is a different kind of war. Battles are quick storms, chaos, and fury that break and pass in hours. Sieges are slow strangulations. Your commander will set camp beyond bowshot of the walls, then begin the long, patient work of choking the town's lifelines. No one goes in, no one comes out, and food and water inside begin to dwindle. It sounds simple, but it is misery for both sides. The first days are spent building. You're handed a shovel and sent to dig trenches, breastworks, and earthworks, long zigzagging ditches meant to let your men move closer to the walls without being picked off by arrows. You haul timber to construct mantlets, movable shields big enough to shelter a handful of men, and rickety siege towers. If your force is lucky, there might be carpenters and engineers to direct the work. If not, it's all trial and error. The labor is exhausting. You dig under the sun, mud clinging to your boots, hands blistering on the wooden haft of your shovel. The walls never stop looming in your vision, and every so often, a shout from above means the defenders are loosing arrows or bolts at anyone who dares work too close. You learn quickly to move in short bursts, dashing from cover to cover, listening for the telltale hiss of incoming fire. If the commanders decide on an assault, that means the siege engines must be built. Catapults and trebuchets take shape under rough carpentry, massive creaking frames with slings and throwing arms designed to hurl boulders, fire pots, or even rotting carcasses over the walls. The first time you watch one of these great machines loose a stone, it's almost beautiful. A slow, graceful arc ending in a deafening crash of shattered masonry. The defenders answer in kind, their own engines lobbing missiles back into your camp. You quickly discover that during a siege, danger never truly sleeps. Even in the quiet hours, the enemy might sally out in small groups to burn your siege works, pick off stragglers, or ambush your supply lines. The younger fighters are often given sentry duty at night, pacing the lines with a spear or bow in hand, peering into the darkness for any sign of movement. The stillness plays tricks on you. A shifting shadow might be a cat, or it might be a man crawling low toward your position. You never know until you're shouting the alarm. Food is a concern here too. While the defenders slowly starve inside, the besiegers must keep their own supplies flowing. Wagons from the countryside bring in barrels of grain, salted fish ale, and whatever livestock can be driven to the camp. But the longer the siege drags on, the leaner the rations become. For a boy barely past childhood, the grind of half-empty bellies and unending work begins to wear away the last illusions about glory in war. And then there is the mining. Not the kind for gold or silver, the kind meant to bring down a wall. Teams of men, sometimes including the younger soldiers, are sent to dig tunnels beneath the fortifications. The work is dangerous and suffocating. You crawl in low, dark passages, the air thick with dust, the timber props groaning overhead. You carry out soil in baskets, listening for the sounds of the defenders digging their own countermines toward you. When the tunnel is ready, it's packed with combustibles set alight and left to collapse the foundations above. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes you're still inside when the enemy finds your tunnel first. As the days stretch into weeks, you begin to see the subtle signs of strain on both sides. The defenders' arrows come less frequently. You catch glimpses of thinner faces on the walls. At night, the watchfires atop the towers seem fewer, but your own camp is thinning too, men succumbing to wounds, illness, or simple exhaustion. Dysentery sweeps through the tents. Fever claims the unlucky. The smell of sickness and death settles in the air. Morale rises and falls in strange patterns. A successful strike against the enemy's outer works can send spirits soaring for a day. A sudden downpour that floods the trenches can sink them just as quickly. For a young fighter, it's a strange education in patience and endurance. The quick rush of battle feels almost easier than the long drag of waiting, digging, and watching. And then sometimes the order comes, prepare for the assault. Ladders are gathered, mantlets moved forward, siege towers rolled into position under the cover of darkness. You're told to sleep if you can, though no one really does. In the cold hours before dawn, you grip your weapon and stare at the looming shadow of the walls, knowing that soon you'll be racing toward them under a storm of arrows. The first steps toward the walls are the worst. The ground is rough-pitted from weeks of bombardment. Men fall before you even reach the base, arrows in their throats, stones crushing their helmets. You rush past them, heart hammering, the weight of your gear dragging at your limbs. You reach the wall, throw yourself against it, and begin to climb. The defenders fight with a desperation born of knowing they have nowhere to run. Boiling water, pitch, and sand rain down. Crossbow bolts whistle past your ear. Somewhere to your left, a ladder tips backward, spilling men into the ditch below. But above you, someone reaches the parapet, hauls himself over, and vanishes from sight into the fight beyond. If you make it up, the battle changes to brutal close-quarters chaos. The narrow walkways atop the wall force you into single combat, shield to shield, sword to sword. You have no room to swing widely, no space to step back. It's a test of grit and balance as much as skill. You push, shove, and strike, knowing a single misstep will send you tumbling down to the ground or into the waiting hands of the enemy. Some sieges end here with the walls breached and the defenders overwhelmed. Others grind on even after the outer defenses fall, the fight moving into the streets and alleys of the town itself. And if the town doesn't surrender, the sack begins looting, fire, and slaughter. For the youngest fighters, this is often the moment when the last illusions shatter. Whatever honor they imagined in war is drowned in the chaos of men taking what they can while they can. When it's over, whether by surrender or conquest, you stand among the smoking ruins, too tired to feel anything. You've learned another lesson in what it means to fight in medieval times, that victory can feel as hollow as defeat, and that the cost of taking a place can be almost as great as the cost of defending it. When the dust of the siege finally settles, you find yourself walking through streets that no longer belong to the people who once lived here. The air smells of ash and damp stone. Doorways hang open, windows shattered, market stalls overturned and abandoned. You've been told to help secure the area, but the defenders are either dead prisoners or fled into the countryside. What's left are the ruins of a town and the memories of what it cost to take it. For a young fighter, this moment is strange. You've survived something most of your village will never see and never want to. You've stood under enemy fire, fought hand to hand, on a wall, endured hunger and cold and fear. Part of you feels older now, as though you've crossed into a different realm of life. But you're still young enough to feel uneasy about what you've done and seen. The veterans seem almost casual about it, tired but unsurprised. You realize they've done this before, maybe many times. In the medieval world, a siege victory could change a man's fortunes, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. If you fought well, if someone important saw you act with courage or skill, your name might begin to circulate. A captain might remember the boy who held the ladder when others fell back. A knight might recall the squire who brought him a fresh weapon at a critical moment. These memories could open doors later, a place in the household of a lord, the chance to train formally as a man-at-arms, maybe even the path to knighthood if your birth allowed. But reputation could cut the other way too. If you froze at the wall, if you faltered when ordered to push forward, if you were seen hanging back from the worst of the fight, these things could follow you just as surely. Soldiers remembered such moments, and gossip could cling to you like mud. In the rigid hierarchy of medieval warfare, there was little patience for hesitation, no matter your age. For many young fighters, the prize after a siege wasn't promotion or glory. It was simply survival and the hope of plunder. When a town was taken, the victors often claimed goods as payment coins, livestock, weapons, anything portable. For a boy who owned nothing but his clothes and gear, even a few silver pennies could feel like a fortune. You might trade them for better boots, a sturdier cloak, or tuck them away for the day you returned home. Yet plunder carried its own dangers. Some commanders kept strict order after a victory, allowing only controlled looting and punishing those who disobeyed. Others turned a blind eye, letting their men take what they wished. In the chaos, tempers flared, and disputes over spoils could turn violent, sometimes fatally so. A young fighter had to learn quickly when to speak up and when to keep his head down. If the siege was part of a larger campaign, there might be no time to rest on whatever laurels you'd earned. The army would move on, pushing toward the next objective, chasing retreating enemies, or securing other strongholds. Your body still aching from the climb, the fighting, and the days of hard labor would be asked to do it all again. You'd shoulder your spear, tighten the strap on your battered helmet, and march as though nothing had happened. But the way others saw you might shift in subtle ways. A veteran might offer you a piece of advice unprompted. A sergeant might trust you with a slightly more important task. You might find yourself placed closer to the front of the formation, not as expendable fodder, but as someone expected to set an example for newer arrivals. You realize you're no longer the raw recruit you once were, at least not in the eyes of those around you. The transformation isn't just in status, it's in how you carry yourself. Without meaning to, you start watching others the way the veterans once watched you, assessing whether a man will hold when the arrows come, whether he knows how to keep his shield up, whether he can be relied upon to cover your side in the press. You notice things you never used to see. The small ways fear shows itself, the quiet confidence of those who've survived many fights. You're beginning to read the battlefield before it even forms. Of course, there's still a shadow over it all. You're young enough that the memories of the siege come unbidden at odd times. A clatter in camp makes you flinch, expecting falling stones. The sight of a high wall in a village you passed through makes your stomach tighten. Some nights you wake with the phantom sensation of climbing a ladder under fire, your hands slick and your breath ragged. There's no name for it in your world, no talk of battle shock or trauma. You're simply expected to endure it, to keep moving, to put one foot in front of the other. The older men may sense what you're feeling, but they speak of it only in gruff, oblique ways. It gets easier or you'll get used to it. What they don't say is that you never really do, you just learn to carry it differently. Back in camp, the lull after a siege is a strange, restless time. Repairs are made to weapons and armor, fresh supplies are brought and new orders are awaited. The soldiers who fell are buried in shallow graves or burned in great pyres. The camp smells of wood smoke and sweat of cooking fires and oiled leather. On the surface, it's a return to routine, but underneath, everyone knows the next fight is only a matter of time. For a young fighter, this in-between space can be dangerous. Too much idleness breeds trouble, brawls, gambling, petty theft. Some drift toward the camp followers, merchants, washerwomen, and others who trail the army, spending their meager pay as fast as they earn it. Others volunteer for scouting or messenger duty, preferring the risk of the open road to the slow decay of waiting. You start to understand why some men seem unable to stop fighting, even when they could go home. War, for all its misery, has its own strange momentum. And somewhere in all of this, you realize that your age has stopped being a topic of conversation. No one calls you boy anymore, not because you've grown older in years, but because you've been tested and found capable of enduring what's asked of you. You may still be a teenager, but in the eyes of the army, you're a soldier. And that title once given is not easily taken back. The siege has marked you in ways you can't yet name. It's altered the course of your life no matter what comes next. Even if you were to lay down your spear tomorrow and return to the plow or the forge, you would never again be only a farmer's son or a blacksmith's apprentice. You would always be the one who fought at the walls. The weeks after the siege slip by in a strange rhythm. The army moves, but not with the urgency of the early campaign. There are villages to secure roads, to patrol outposts, to garrison. Your duties shift from the constant, exhausting grind of siege work to the smaller, steadier tasks of keeping an occupied territory under control. It feels different, but no less demanding. At first, the quiet is almost unsettling. You wake expecting the rush of orders, the barked commands to form ranks, the distant rumble of siege engines. Instead, you're sent to escort a supply wagon or to watch over a half-abandoned village while the local lord is summoned. But even in these calmer tasks, you learn quickly that danger doesn't always announce itself. One day, you're walking the edge of a forest with a few others, your spear resting on your shoulder, your thoughts drifting toward dinner. The next moment, arrows whip out of the tree line, and one of your companions is down before you've even drawn breath. Bandits, rebels, or simply desperate townsfolk, it doesn't matter. The fight is short, brutal, and leaves you with the taste of metal in your mouth. You realize that even away from the grand battles, war is always just a heartbeat away. With each encounter, your movements grow sharper, more automatic. You don't think about tightening your helmet strap anymore, you just do it. You don't question the order to move out at dawn. You're already awake and ready when it comes. These small habits accumulate until one day you notice that your old self, the boy who hesitated and looked to others for cues, is gone. In his place is someone who acts without waiting, who trusts his training, his instincts, and his companions. The veterans have begun to treat you differently. They don't offer advice quite as often now, except for the rare important things. Instead, they expect you to keep pace, to take your share of the watch, to hold your line without needing to be told. It's not unkindness, it's trust. You've proven you can carry your weight, and in an army, that means you belong. Belonging is a powerful thing, especially for someone who hasn't yet lived half his years. You find yourself standing a little taller, speaking a little more confidently. You know your place in the company, where you fit in the marching order, whose shield overlaps yours in formation. The men to either side are no longer strangers. They're the ones you've bled with, laughed with, endured cold nights and long marches beside. But there's a shadow to this belonging too. You've begun to realize that the more you serve, the harder it will be to leave. Every new fight, every new march, every new order you follow weaves another thread into the life of a soldier. And the more threads there are, the harder they are to unwind. You've seen men who returned home after years in the ranks only to drift back to the army because they couldn't settle into a quieter life. Your skills have grown sharper. You can keep your spear point steady even with your arms trembling from exhaustion. You can judge the reach of a sword at a glance. You can string and loose a bow with cold, wet fingers. You know the quickest way to patch a split in your gambeson with whatever cloth is at hand. And perhaps most importantly, you can read a man's intentions in the set of his shoulders, the way he grips his weapon, the way his eyes flick toward an opening. These are valuable skills in war and nearly useless outside of it. That thought lingers in the back of your mind, surfacing when you catch yourself moving silently through a village at night, scanning every shadow for trouble when all you're supposed to be doing is fetching water. You wonder if you'll ever be able to stop seeing the world this way. The pay, such as it is steady enough to keep you clothed, fed, and occasionally able to send a coin or two home if home is still where you left it. Letters, if they come at all, are few. Sometimes you hear news from passing merchants, a poor harvest, a fire in the next shire, a marriage or a death. You store these scraps of information carefully, turning them over in your mind during long watches or sleepless nights. The connection to your old life grows thinner with each passing season. The seasons themselves mark the passage of time more clearly than any calendar. Spring means mud and swollen rivers slowing the march. Summer brings dust and heat armor chafing and water skins running dry. Autumn is the season of campaigns when the harvest is in, and lords turn their attention to settling scores before winter. And winter is a trial all its own. Cold that seeps through every layer, frost that stiffens your gear, wind that cuts to the bone. Fires help, but never enough. Winter also means long stretches of waiting. Armies rarely mount major offensives in deep cold, so you spend more time in garrisons or winter camps. It's here that you see another side of soldiering. The boredom, the gambling, the petty squabbles that can turn violent in a heartbeat. For younger fighters, winter is often when they learn the subtler arts of surviving in an army, not just keeping warm and fab, but navigating the politics of the company, knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. Some winters, the commanders disband the levies until spring, sending men back to their villages. Others keep the core force together, especially if the borders are unsettled. If you're kept on, it means more work guarding roads, patrolling against raiders, keeping the peace in restive towns. It also means your life as a soldier doesn't pause just because the weather has turned. You notice now that the younger recruits look at you the way you once looked at the veterans, searching for unspoken cues, gauging when you're serious, when you're at ease, when danger is near. You didn't set out to become an example, but here you are, the one others watch. It's a strange weight to carry. You try not to think about how many of them might still be here a year from now. By now, you know that the question of how old did you have to be to fight isn't really asked by soldiers in the ranks. Once you've survived a few months in the field, age ceases to matter. What matters is whether you can do the job, whether you can stand your ground, whether you can follow orders, whether you can keep moving when every part of you wants to stop. Those who can do these things are soldiers, no matter how few birthdays they've had. As you sit by the fire one cold evening, mending a tear in your cloak, you realize that war has become the rhythm of your life. Not just the battles and sieges, but the marches, the camps, the endless small duties that fill the days between. You can imagine doing this for another season, another year. You can even imagine doing it until you're one of the old, scarred veterans with stories to tell and warnings to give. And yet part of you wonders if you'll recognize yourself when that day comes. Winter drags on, and with it the strange, restless rhythm of garrison life. You'd think the cold months would make you long for home more than ever, for the familiar hearth, the smells of your family's cooking, the sound of voices you've known all your life. But the longer you serve, the more complicated that longing becomes. You try to picture your old life. The village square in springtime, the lanes lined with thatched cottages, the fields stretching toward the low hills. You remember the faces, friends, family, neighbors, and the shape of days filled with work, so different from this tending crops, mending fences, fetching water. It's all still there in your mind, but it feels smaller now. Not lesser exactly, just distant, like looking at a place through a narrow window from far away. The truth is, you've changed in ways you don't fully understand. You move differently, think differently, carry yourself differently. You look at the faces of those younger than you, faces that have never seen a battle, never heard the whistle of arrows overhead, and they seem impossibly young. And then you remember that's what you looked like not long ago. This is the quiet danger of long service. The world of war starts to feel like the real world, and the world you came from starts to feel like a dream. The camp becomes its own kind of home. You know where to hang your cloak so it won't freeze stiff in the night. You know which cook fires will feed you without watering the stew until it's tasteless. You know who in your company snores and who talks in his sleep. These details root you in a strange, rough comfort. And then there's the belonging. Out here, you've earned your place. Not because of birth or land or inheritance, but because you've stood your ground when it mattered. Every man in your unit knows what you've been through because they've been through it too. They've seen you in the mud, in the rain, in the press of a fight. They've seen you bloodied and bone-tired and still holding your place in the line. That kind of bond is not easily found in peacetime. Letters from home are rare, and when they do arrive, they don't always bring comfort. They speak of things you're no longer part of, harvests you didn't help bring in, weddings you didn't attend, funerals you missed. You read the words, but they feel like messages from another lifetime. The news is real, but your connection to it is thin. You fold the letter carefully and put it away, unsure whether it's made you feel better or worse. Some men dream constantly of going back. They talk about it around the fire, the fields they'll till, the wives they'll wed, the ale they'll drink in the tavern where they first learned to fight with wooden swords. Others barely mention home at all. You've learned to pay attention to which is which. Sometimes the ones who speak of home the loudest are the ones who never make it back. You start to realize that going home won't mean going back to who you were. You'll return as someone else, someone who's seen too much to slide easily back into the old rhythms. The people you once knew will still see the boy who left, but you'll know you're not that boy anymore. And they won't truly understand what's different. Not because they don't care, but because they can't. There are moments when you catch yourself imagining what it would be like to stay in the army for good. To keep marching from place to place, season to season, fighting and surviving alongside the men you've come to know as brothers. The thought is both comforting and unsettling. Comforting because you understand this life now. Unsettling because you know how easily it could become the only life you have. The veterans warn about this in their own way. They'll tell you about men who tried to go home after years in the ranks, only to find themselves restless, unable to sleep without the sound of a camp nearby. Men who left the army in spring and came back by autumn saying they couldn't settle. They missed the road, the camaraderie, even the danger. You wonder if you'll be one of them. Sometimes when you're on watch at night, you think about the difference between the word home and the word safe. In your village, they meant the same thing. Now they don't. Home might be far away, but safety is wherever your company stands strong, wherever your shield locks against another, wherever your companions keep watch while you sleep. In that sense, the army has become your home even if it's one you never chose. It's a strange truth war has taken your youth, but it's also given you a place in the world. You know what you are here. Out there beyond the campfires and the reach of the banners, you're not sure. And so you keep moving with the company when orders come. You shoulder your pack, adjust your gear, fall into step with the others. The path ahead may lead to another siege, another battle, another winter in a distant land. You don't know when, if ever, you'll see the fields and faces of your childhood again. But for now, you march with your brothers in arms, because this is where you belong. That's the paradox no one tells you when you're young, and first handed a spear, you might leave home to fight. But somewhere along the way, the fight becomes your home. And once that happens, leaving it behind can feel as hard as leaving the place you were born. By now, you've served long enough to notice that war isn't just about the clash of swords and the push of shields. It's also about decisions made far above your head. Decisions you don't always understand and sometimes don't even hear about, until you're already marching to carry them out. When you first took up arms, the word orders meant a simple thing. The captain or sergeant told you to stand here, march there, or fight that man, and you did it. You didn't ask why. Now, after seasons of service, you've started to glimpse the layers above those orders. The lords and commanders have their own reasons for choosing when to fight, when to hold, and when to march away. And those reasons aren't always the ones you'd expect. Sometimes a campaign you thought was about defending your lands turns out to be about a disputed inheritance between noble houses. Sometimes a siege is lifted, not because the enemy surrendered, but because someone at court struck a bargain behind closed doors. You realize that in the grand game, you and your companions are the pieces moved across the board, not the players moving them. It doesn't make you bitter exactly, but it does make you pay attention. You start watching how the captains speak to each other in the officer's tent, how the Lord's banner changes position in camp when new allies arrive, how the mood shifts after a messenger comes in with a sealed letter. You learn to read the unspoken signs of whether you're on the winning side or if trouble is brewing. Your loyalty has grown, but it's a loyalty shaped by the road. You fight for your company first, the men who watch your back, who've shared their bread, who've dragged you out of danger when your legs gave way. Your loyalty to the banner to the Lord whose colors you wear comes after that. You'll follow his orders, but it's the faces beside you that keep you in the fight when things go bad. The veterans talk about this too, though not always openly. They'll tell stories about past campaigns where a commander's ambition cost good men their lives, or where a retreat was ordered for reasons that had nothing to do with the battle at hand. These tales aren't told to breed rebellion. They're told so you understand the truth. War is as much about politics as it is about steel. That truth becomes clearer when you're sent on a campaign far from home. You march into lands where the people speak differently, where the villages look strange, where the banners flying from the walls are ones you've never seen before. The lords may say you're fighting for honor, for alliance, for the defense of the realm. But when you look into the eyes of the defenders, you see men and boys just like yourself. They fight for their own reasons, just as you do. And you understand that loyalty is a matter of where you were standing when the orders were given. In time, you start to see the subtle ways leadership reveals itself. The best captains know their men's names. They walk the lines before a battle, not just to check the gear, but to look you in the eye. They know when to push and when to pull back. They share in the hardships, marching on foot beside the rest of you, eating the same rations, taking the same risks. Under leaders like this, the company will fight harder because the men believe in them as much as they believe in the cause. Then there are the other kind, the ones who ride at the back, safe behind a wall of soldiers. The ones whose armor is polished, but whose hands never touch a weapon in the press of battle. The ones who eat well while their men go hungry. Under leaders like this, loyalty frays. The men still fight because discipline demands it, but the bond between rank and file and command grows thin. And once that bond is gone, even victory feels hollow. You've learned, too, that loyalty isn't just vertical up to your commander, but horizontal across the line. When a man beside you takes a wound, you don't stop to wonder whether he followed orders well last week, or whether he agrees with the cause. You help him because he's your comrade, because you know he'd do the same for you. That kind of loyalty is forged in the moments between life and death, and it's stronger than any oath spoken before a lord. Occasionally, the politics above filter down in more dangerous ways. You might find yourself holding a position not because it's tactically wise, but because giving it up would look weak to an ally. Or you might be ordered to press an attack that everyone in the ranks knows is folly, because a noble wants a quick victory to impress a rival. These are the moments that test your faith in leadership, when you're reminded that the lives of men are sometimes weighed against the pride of those in command. Still, there's a certain grim acceptance among the soldiers. You know you can't control the big decisions. What you can control is how you carry out the orders you're given, how you protect the men beside you, and how you keep yourself alive for another day. That's the soldier's bargain. You give your service, and in return you trust that your companions will see you through. Your view of loyalty has changed from the boy who first took up a spear. Back then, loyalty meant doing as you were told. Now it means knowing who you truly serve. You serve the company, the line, the brothers who share your hardships. You serve the banner because it binds you together, not because you believe every word spoken in its name. In quieter moments, you think about how young you still are, how much of your life has already been given to following orders you had no hand in shaping. You wonder how many more years of service it would take before the politics behind the war matter less to you than the war itself. You've seen older soldiers for whom the cause no longer matters at all, only the fight. They measure time not in years, but in campaigns. You can see how easily that could become your future. And yet there's a strange strength in knowing your place in this chain. You know what's expected of you. You know how to read the mood of your leaders. You know when to keep your head down and when to step forward. You may not be the one giving the orders, but you've learned to survive under them, and that's its own kind of mastery. The boy who once thought a soldier's life was about swords and shields has learned that it's also about trust and judgment, about reading men as carefully as you read the battlefield. And in that way, you've grown into a fighter who understands not just how to fight, but why you fight and for whom. It happens slowly at first, and then all at once. One week, you're marching under orders to push deeper into enemy territory, braced for the next clash. The next, the horns sound not for battle, but for parley. Whispers spread through the camp, envoys have arrived, banners of truce fluttering in the cold wind. You've seen truces before, moments when fighting pauses so the dead can be buried or prisoners exchanged. But this feels different. Captains disappear into the command tent for hours. Messengers ride in and out with sealed scrolls. The mood in camp shifts from tense anticipation to restless uncertainty. And then the announcement comes, the war, at least against this enemy, is over. Your lord has struck a bargain. The man whose banner you've been told to fear, the one you've charged against, and watched your friends fall before he is now an ally. The first time you hear it, it doesn't make sense. You think of the faces on the other side of the wall during the siege, the clash of spears in the mud, the shouts in a language that sounded like defiance. You remember the man who nearly cut you down in a skirmish by the river. And now you're supposed to stand beside him, trusting him to guard your flank as if none of it happened. The veterans take it in stride. They've seen this before. They shrug and say it's the way of things. Lords and kings have their quarrels, and they also have their reconciliations. Soldiers fight where they're told, and then they stop when told. It's not personal, they say, it's politics. But for you, it's harder to swallow. You've spent years learning to see the enemy as other. Not evil, perhaps, but certainly dangerous, someone who would kill you without hesitation. Now you're expected to look past all of that, because a few nobles have exchanged promises. It feels like being told the ground is sky and the sky is ground, and you're expected to walk as though nothing's changed. The first time you march alongside them, the air is thick with unspoken tension. You keep glancing at their weapons, wondering if they'll turn them on you, the moment backs are turned. They glance at you the same way. The commanders might declare an alliance, but trust doesn't come from words spoken in a tent. It comes from time spent surviving together. And time is the one thing you can't rush. Shared danger has a way of reshaping things. Not long after the alliance is struck, you find yourselves fighting a new enemy together. The field is chaotic lines shifting under pressure. In the press of the melee, one of your former foes, a man you recognize by his armor, blocks a blow meant for you. Without thinking, you cover his side in return. The exchange is wordless, instinctive. Later, around the campfire, you nod to each other across the flames. It's not friendship yet, but it's a start. Over weeks and months, the strangeness fades. You learn their names, hear their jokes, share their food when rations run low. You realize they fight for the same reasons you do not, because they hate the man across from them, but because it's the life they've been bound to. They too were told where to stand, who to guard, who to kill. You start to see how arbitrary the lines can be drawn and redrawn by men who never have to hold them under arrow fire. But there are still moments when the past flares. A careless comment, a story of a battle where your sides met before the truce and the air tightens. Old wounds don't vanish. They wait quiet but alive beneath the surface. You learn to navigate these moments the way you'd skirt a bog carefully without sinking too deep. Sometimes you wonder if you'll ever meet an enemy who stays an enemy forever. The veterans tell you not to count on it. They talk about men they've fought alongside in one war and against in the next. They laugh about it now, but you can see the shadows in their eyes when they speak of those times. War is fickle, they say, and the hands that steer it are as changeable as the wind. For a young soldier, these shifting alliances teach a hard truth. Loyalty is not the same as enmity. You can fight fiercely against a man one season and stand beside him the next without either changing who you are. The loyalty that matters is to the company you're with now in this moment in this fight. Tomorrow, the lines may move again, and you'll have to adjust all over. This constant shifting shapes the way you think. You stop asking why as often, because the answers rarely help. You start focusing instead on how to work with the men beside you, how to hold the line no matter whose colors they wear, how to keep yourself alive when the ground keeps changing under your feet. It's not cynicism exactly, it's adaptation. The change also seeps into your sense of identity. Once you might have said proudly, "I fight for my Lord." Now you say simply, "I fight with my company." You still wear the Lord's colors, still salute his banner. But in your heart, you know the bond that matters is with the men who will stand shoulder to shoulder with you when the charge comes. There's a strange kind of freedom in this understanding. You can accept the politics without letting them define you. You can fight hard without needing to believe in every cause. You can find respect, even a kind of kinship, in men who once stood against you because you see them now as mirrors of yourself. One evening after a long day of marching with the newly allied troops, you sit by the fire and realize something. The question that brought you into this life, how old do you have to be to fight, no longer feels like the right question. It's not about when you're old enough to hold a weapon. It's about when you're old enough to understand that fighting isn't always about who's right or wrong. Sometimes it's just about who's standing next to you when the orders come. And in that moment, you understand why the veterans don't flinch at the turn of alliances. They've seen enough to know that the faces across the field today might be the ones at your side tomorrow. And the only thing that really matters is making sure you all survive long enough to see that day. The years in service have a way of blurring together. Campaign seasons come and go like the turning of leaves, and you measure time less by the calendar and more by the rhythm of marching, fighting, and waiting. At first, the repetition felt like stability, predictable in its own way. But as the seasons pile up, the weight of them begins to press in from all sides. It starts small. You wake one morning with an ache in your knee that doesn't fade after a day's march. A cut on your hand takes longer to heal than it used to. You're a little slower getting to your feet after sitting by the fire. You laugh it off. At first, you're still young after all. But deep down, you know that these aren't just aches from yesterday's work. They're the beginnings of the long, slow wear that soldiering leaves in the bones. The toll isn't only physical. There's a heaviness in your mind now that wasn't there in your first campaigns. In the early days, every march, every battle carried a strange charge, fear, and adrenaline in equal measure. Now the anticipation is dulled. You've learned what to expect, and sometimes that's worse. You know how long a siege can drag on. You know what a battlefield looks like at the end of the day. You know the smell that clings to your gear after a fight. That familiarity can make you slower to hope, slower to believe that the next campaign will be different. The veterans have a wordless way of showing this. They move efficiently, do their work, keep their gear in order, but their eyes are often far away. When they speak of past battles, their tone isn't boastful. It's matter of fact, even flat. You're starting to sound the same without realizing it. The cracks begin to show in other ways too. You find yourself less eager to make friends among the new recruits. You've seen too many fall in their first battle, too many vanish from the ranks after a single winter. You still train beside them, still show them how to strap their armor properly or keep their bowstring dry. But you keep a small distance in your heart, a space where their loss won't hit quite as hard. At least, that's what you tell yourself. Sleep changes. The camp is quieter some nights, but you still wake often, sometimes to the sound of a snapping branch, sometimes to nothing at all. The dreams are vivid when they come the face of a man you fought, the sound of an arrow passing close the moment you lost your footing on a muddy slope. You wake with your heart racing, gripping the blanket, as if it were a shield. By morning, you act as though nothing happened. That's the soldier's way. You've also learned that rest isn't the same as recovery. Even when the company is in garrison for the winter, your body never fully lets go of the tension. The work changes, more guard duty, less marching, but the edge remains. You're always listening for trouble, watching for signs that orders are about to send you back on the road. Sometimes in the rare quiet hours, you think about home, not the hazy, idealized memory, but the actual place you left. You wonder who's still there, who's grown older, who's gone. You wonder if they'd even recognize you now. You imagine walking into the village square, in your worn armor, the road dust still on your boots, and seeing the looks in their eyes. Would they see the boy who left? Or only the soldier you've become, the younger? You would have said you'd serve until you had enough coin to buy your freedom from the road. The you of today knows that freedom is harder to claim than you thought. It's not just about coin. It's about whether you can put down the spear and truly walk away. And after so many seasons, that question is harder to answer. You've seen men try. They take their pay and head home swearing this campaign was their last. A year later, they're back sometimes because they couldn't make ends meet without the soldier's wage sometimes, because the farm work felt hollow, after years of battle sometimes, because the quiet itself was unbearable. War changes what silence means. For some, it becomes too loud to bear. The company you serve with now is a mix of old hands and fresh faces. The old hands carry themselves with a kind of weary precision, their gear worn but well kept, their movements efficient. The fresh faces still talk about glory, still brag about who they'll fight and what they'll win. You stand somewhere between them, not as quick to dream as the new ones, not as closed off as the veterans. But you can feel yourself shifting toward the latter. The loyalty that once felt like fire in your chest is now more like an anchor. You still stand for your comrades, still protect them, still march beside them without hesitation. But it's less about a cause and more about a habit, a deep-rooted, unshakable way of living that you can't imagine setting aside. You belong here in the line because it's where you've always been. That belonging comes at a cost. You've noticed you don't laugh as easily as you used to. The small joys, warm bread, a well-struck campfire, a good story told by the fire still matter, but they're fleeting. You take them when they come, knowing they'll vanish with the next march, the next siege, the next set of orders. It's not all darkness. There's still a pride in knowing you've endured what others couldn't in having the skill to survive battles and winters alike. You know how to keep your weapon sharp, your body ready, your mind focused. You know how to read the ground, the sky, the enemy. Those are hard-won abilities, and you carry them with a quiet satisfaction. But you also know they were bought at a price, one that grows heavier with each passing season. Sometimes you catch sight of yourself reflected in water or polished metal, and you're startled. Not by scars or lines, though they're there, but by the set of your eyes. They're older than the rest of you. You wonder if that's how others see you too. You're still young by the count of years. But in the count of campaigns, in the weight of what you've seen, you've lived more than some men twice your age. And that's the truth you carry once you've given enough years to the road. The road leaves its mark on you forever. The cracks don't mean you're broken. Not yet. But you can feel them widening slowly, season by season. And you wonder quietly how many more before the gap between the boy who left home and the man who might return becomes too wide to cross. The campaigns feel different now. It's not just the weather or the terrain, it's you. You've been carrying arms for so long that the weight feels as natural as your own skin, but lately, you've begun to sense the shift that comes when the road behind you is longer than the road ahead. Word spreads that the war is winding down. The big battles are over, the enemy's strength broken, the lords beginning to speak more often of harvests and trade than sieges and marches. There are still skirmishes, still outposts to hold, still dangers on the roads, but the push has lost its urgency. The horizon no longer carries the constant promise of another great clash. For the younger recruits, this is cause for celebration. They talk about going home, about laying down their arms, about finally sleeping without their boots within arm's reach. For you, the feeling is more complicated. You've been doing this for so long that the idea of stopping feels strange, unsettling. You've built your life around the rhythm of the soldier's year, spring marches, summer sieges, autumn raids, winter garrisons. What happens when that cycle breaks? There's a quiet unease in the company. Some men begin hoarding coins and goods, preparing for the return to whatever life they left behind. Others seem restless, even irritable, as if they'd rather the war go on than face the stillness that comes after. You understand both feelings. The captains still keep you busy. Patrols into the countryside to make sure the peace holds. Escorting merchants now that the roads are safer. Guarding the towns and fortresses that were hard won in the last campaigns. The work is easier than siege or pitched battle, but it's also emptier. Without the press of true danger, the days begin to blur in a different way, less survival, more routine. You've noticed your own habits changing. You keep your armor in good repair, but you polish it less often. Your spear is still sharp, but the edge hasn't bitten into an enemy shield in months. Your eyes still scan the tree line on patrol, but more often than not, there's nothing there. It's in this lull that memories start creeping in more often. Faces you haven't thought of in years. The boy from your village who marched beside you in your first campaign and fell in a muddy field before you'd even seen your second. The knight who took you on as a squire and taught you how to hold a shield steady under a rain of arrows. The veteran who showed you how to keep your boots dry in the wettest march. Some of these men are gone. Some may be out there somewhere having left the war before you. You wonder if they think of you too. When the orders finally come for you to stand down, the moment doesn't feel as triumphant as you once imagined it would. There's no grand ceremony, no farewell feast. The company is simply told that their service is no longer required. Those with land or family to return to leave within days. Those without linger. You linger. Part of you knows you could go back to the village. You could take up whatever work you can find, farmhand miller's helper, maybe even guard duty for the local lord if he'll have you. But you've been living on the road for so long that the thought of waking in the same bed every night feels almost alien. You've learned to read the dawn sky as a sign of the day's march ahead, to measure your meals by how far you've traveled, to judge the worth of a camp by how quickly you can pack it and move on. How do you unlearn that? Some of the old hands tell you to give it time. The first months are strange, they say. Then you find your feet again. Others warn you that you may never feel truly at home again in one place. You listen to them all, but you're not sure which you believe. The truth is, you've built your sense of self around being a soldier. You know who you are in a shield wall on a night watch in the silent hour before a charge. You know your worth when you're holding a spear and the men beside you trust you to hold the line. Without that, you're not entirely sure what's left. And so you walk the edges of the camp in the evenings, even though you no longer have to. You keep your gear close, even though there's no call for it. You rise early, even though the mornings are yours now. Old habits cling like burrs. One day you hear that another lord to the south is mustering men for a campaign of his own. The pay's decent, the risk moderate. You could join him. You could keep going. Keep the rhythm of the soldier's life a little longer. It would be easy to do. But then you think of the road behind you and how much of it you've already walked. You think of the weight of years, not in birthdays, but in campaigns, and how they've carved you into what you are. You think of the boy who once asked how old you had to be to fight, and you realize that for you, that question has long since been answered. You were old enough the moment you stopped asking. The war may be ending, but the soldier in you doesn't vanish with it. It lingers quiet but present, shaping how you see the world, how you move through it, how you measure danger and safety. Maybe that will fade in time. Maybe it never will. For now you stand at a crossroads, spear in hand, looking toward the open road and the long-forgotten path home. The wind smells of early spring, carrying with it the promise of change. Somewhere ahead lies the answer to the question you're almost afraid to ask. What does life look like after the fight? You take a breath, and for the first time in years, you're not entirely sure which way you'll go. The road home feels both familiar and foreign. It's the same dirt track you might have walked as a boy, though you walked it then without armor on your shoulders, without the weight of a spear in your hand, without the quiet heaviness that now sits behind your eyes. The hedgerows are taller than you remember. The fields stretch out the same as ever, but they seem smaller somehow, as though the horizon has been brought in closer. With every mile, the sound of the army fades. The steady rhythm of marching boots, the clink of weapons, the murmur of hundreds of voices. It's gone now, replaced by bird song, the wind in the grass, the distant bark of a farm dog. At first, the quiet is soothing. Then it's unsettling. You find yourself glancing over your shoulder as though expecting to see the company still there waiting for you. When you reach the village, it's almost as you left it. The same cottages leaning into the wind, the same well in the square, the same smell of wood smoke drifting from the chimneys. But the faces have changed. Some you know instantly older now, but still familiar. Others you don't recognize at all, children who were not yet born when you left, strangers who have settled here in your absence. They greet you warmly enough. They ask where you've been, though most already know in broad strokes. You tell them bits and pieces, never the full truth. How could you explain what years of war feel like to someone who has never heard the hiss of arrows overhead? You smile and nod and accept their congratulations for returning home safely. Inside, you're not sure if safe is the right word. The first nights back are the hardest. You lie in a real bed for the first time in years, the mattress soft under you, the air still. You should sleep deeply, but your body refuses. You wake at every creak of the timbers, every change in the wind. You keep your spear within reach, out of habit, more than necessity. In the morning you rise before the sun, as though the sergeant's whistle might sound any moment. People expect you to settle in, to take up a trade, to find your place again in the rhythm of the village. You try. You help in the fields, fix the thatch on a roof, carry sacks of grain from the mill. The work is honest, but it feels like moving through water, slower, heavier than the life you've known. Your hands are strong, your body capable, but the skills you've honed for years have little place here. No one needs a shield wall to bring in the harvest. You find moments of peace, sitting in the sun with a loaf of fresh bread, listening to the river while the village goes about its work, watching children play with sticks and pretend to be knights, their laughter ringing through the air. You remember when you did the same, never imagining how close to the truth that game would become. But even in peace, war lingers. You catch yourself studying the way the wind bends the tall grass, thinking about how it might hide an approaching enemy. You scan the tree line without meaning to. You measure distances between houses, imagining lines of retreat or defense. It's not fear, it's habit. Habits carved so deeply that they feel like part of you now. Some days you miss the road. Not the fighting exactly, but the clarity of it. In war, the choices were simple. Hold the line, follow the order, protect the man beside you. Here life is quieter, but more uncertain. No one is telling you where to stand or when to move. The path ahead is yours to choose, and after years of being given a place, that freedom can feel more daunting than the battlefield. The people in the village see you as a man now, no matter your age. They look to you in small ways, a dispute over a boundary, a question of safety when strangers pass through. You've learned to read people, to judge intent, to keep calm under pressure. Those skills have a place here after all, though you never thought of them as anything but survival tools. When the talk in the tavern turns to rumors of new unrest, you listen without speaking. Some will never fight again. Others speak of joining if the call comes. You sit quietly because you know that if the banners are raised once more, the question of whether you'll go will not be an easy one. The road still knows your steps, and part of you still belongs to it. One evening, standing outside under the stars, you think back to the boy you were. The boy who thought you had to be a certain age to fight. The boy who thought battle was about glory and valor. You wish you could tell him the truth, that it was never about the number of years you'd lived, but about whether you could endure what was asked of you. That once you stepped into the line, you were a soldier, no matter your age. And that the hardest part would not be fighting, but finding your way back afterward. The night is quiet. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks and the wind stirs the leaves in the hedgerow. You take a deep breath, feeling the weight of all the roads you've walked, all the faces you've known, all the battles you've survived. Peace may be here now, but you know better than most how fragile it can be. You turn toward the path that leads home, your home now, not the roads. You walk slowly, listening to the soft crunch of earth under your boots. You know the road will always be part of you. But for tonight, at least you let yourself believe that you've walked far enough. The road has faded now, its dust and clamor far behind you. What's left is the stillness of a warm night, the comfort of a familiar room, and the sense that for the moment, your journey is over. You've walked through years in the span of an evening, from the uncertain steps of a boy holding his first spear to the steady tread of a soldier who's seen and endured more than he ever imagined. The sounds of battle are gone. No horns, no clash of steel, no shouts across the field. In their place is the soft hum of the present, the creak of settling wood, the faint rush of wind outside the quiet rhythm of your own breathing. You can let the weight slip from your shoulders now. There are no orders to follow, no line to hold, no watch to keep. Only rest. You've carried your armor for a long time, both the steel kind and the invisible sort that guards the heart. Tonight you can set it aside. Feel the air move freely against your skin. Let your body sink into the softness beneath you. Every part of you has earned this stillness. The road will always be there if you choose to walk it again. But for now, it can wait. Your thoughts can wander down quieter paths, a summer meadow. In the early morning, the golden slant of evening light across a quiet field, the slow drift of clouds overhead. Let your eyes grow heavy. Let the edges of the room blur. The journey has brought you here to this moment of peace. Hold it gently. Let it carry you into dreams,